I'm going to talk about memorandums, libraries, and data management. So this is a really sort of brief overview of this policy that came out. So this is not going to be something super duper in-depth, but feel free to get in touch with me if you want to talk more deeply about this. So I wanted to give you kind of a little bit of a sample history of why this thing is coming out. So this isn't just coming out of this requirement for managing data, for requiring access to the results of research isn't just popping out of nowhere. There is a long history of it. Researchers have been talking about it well before the policy came out from the NIH in 2003, but that's really one of the first times we see a policy coming out encouraging folks to share their data. Compliance with this policy, not so hot. But as we continue to go through history, as we continue to go through time, policies are getting a little bit more sophisticated. I think the NOAA, that one's really interesting. That comes out in 2004, and they have a lot of good buy-in from that. OECD, so that's an international data sharing policy. So this is not something just happening in the United States. It's also happening across the globe. NSF is a big one. Lots of feelings, agony, excitement around the NSF, and then the OSTP comes out with this policy entitled Increasing Access to Results of Federally Funded Research in 2013. So 2 years ago, and we are just now in 2015, end of 2014, finally starting to see some of these draft plans coming out. So bureaucracy, right? It's a little bit slow, but it's getting there. So for me, I wanted to know who the heck are the OSTP? What right do they have to make these policies? So the OSTP stands for Office of Science and Technology Policy, and they really help provide some guidance to the president and to the higher-ups on things that affect multiple federal agencies. So if something has an impact on more than one federal agency, they're really providing some guidance for that. So they're really trying to coordinate some stuff here. That's a lot of that's a lot of cats. So it's the shirt. So again, this is the policy that I'm going to talk a little bit about is called Increasing Access to the Results of Federally Funded Research. And it's the big guidelines about it. One of the big things that helps us give a little bit of perspective to this policy is it only applies to federal agencies that expend $100 million in research and development dollars every year. So that's a big chunk of folks. That's 30, maybe 40 agencies that fall under that umbrella. But that's a lot of money, and that's a lot of data, and that's a lot of scientific information coming out. And they also have to have clear and coordinated policies for increasing access. So that's all part of this plan. They don't want folks to just make up stuff, arm flailing. So plan elements, they do want to have agencies take advantage of existing infrastructure. Infrastructure is very expensive, so please, please, please try and leverage what's out there already. Help the public locate and access data. So don't put stuff up on your website, right? Nobody's going to find that. But help the public really have that interaction with the public to let them get their hands on it. Optimize search, storage, and dissemination kind of goes along with that. But again, sort of laying the groundwork, thinking about how we can optimize these things and not just build off of what we have and meet the status quo and maybe let things go a little bit wild. Measure and enforce compliance, so I'm really interested in this. There aren't a lot of sticks yet. I think the funders all recognize that these are really, really, really big ships that need to turn, but they do have some compliance suggestions in there. They do want to see that in there and implemented in these agencies' plans. And then they also want an implementation timeline. So give these agencies an idea of how long it's going to take, and if there are any challenges to implementing this timeline, the agencies, so for example, if the VA had a challenge implementing their timeline, they should tell the OSTP, hey, we got a problem, please give us a little bit more time. So there are a couple of other big chunks in that policy. So again, results of federally funded research, we're looking at publications and access to data. So around publications, there encouraging agencies, again, these agencies with $100 million in R&D dollars, make sure that the public can find and read and download and gain access to these publications coming out of the funding that you are giving out to people, right? So help folks gain access to the results of the research that you funded. Full access to metadata at first publication. So when something is out there, have the public gain access to at least knowing that this thing exists in the universe. And make sure that publications and metadata are stored in archivally sound ways. I thought this was really interesting because it's a big policy, a big organization, really recognizing that we do have to have some sustainability built into this, or it's all just going to be, again, the Wild West of the internet. For data, maximizing access to data, and I think agencies are also really cognizant of, say, data that has personally identifiable information, data that might have security issues. They're really, really cognizant that this is not an umbrella thing with data. There's a lot happening. There are a lot of different data types. There are a lot of different cultural, discipline-specific challenges that make up this wonderful world of data, but they are asking, please, please, please maximize access to this data. Require data management plans and grant applications. Again, plan ahead. We are awful at planning ahead, and if a grant cycle is 5 years or 7 years, terrible at planning ahead. But really start to think about the end result. Think about archiving your data. Think about how that whole project is going to go forward. So that's the role of that data management plan that you'll kind of get a little bit of an insight into today. And deposit data in publicly accessible databases. Again, databases not behind paywalls where and data that's not just hidden somewhere, data that's not on a website, again, to the extent possible. So some common guidelines and themes that are coming out of these policies. Again, about 22 policies have come out so far. These are plans responding to the OSTP. About 22 have come out. Interestingly, the VA just came out with theirs. I feel like the OSTP Librarian hive mind recently found it a couple weeks ago, but it's dated in March. So again, that timeline is a little bit of a lag. I keep thinking, gosh, did I miss it in March? It's like, no. It just wasn't available to us yet. But some common guidelines and themes from all of these folks. A lot of them are using PubMed Central as their model for article deposit. PubMed Central, so you just deposit your article there and then it's available. That's meeting that requirement that things should be available within that 12-month period. So building off of that, again, leveraging that other infrastructure that's there. Articles, again, freely available within 12 months. That is part of that OSTP policy. Agencies can argue to make that embargo period longer or shorter, but most are adopting that 12-month guideline. Data available immediately or within 12 to 30 months of completion. So that's really, really cool. A lot of folks are having data available. They want the data available at time of publication. And then again, recognizing that sometimes it takes a lot of time to pull together all the parts of a data set. They are also saying, you know, it's okay if you need a little bit of time, but we do want to see that data set available. Again, data management plan requirement, they're going to be offering more guidance. It's not not very many of them other than the NSF are too deeply fleshed out yet, but they're getting there. And I'm super excited about the Data and Research Commons implementation. So this is, they're all talking, oh, we'll investigate this in like 2017. So there's nothing that's happened so far. Just yet, but it's not going to be one home for all the data, but it is going to be a home for all the metadata about the data. So researchers and funding agencies are, again, building into that compliance, into that reporting cycle, because researchers have to report every year what they're up to. You can build into that cycle, oh, I'm going to add a little bit of metadata to this research commons, and that's going to help folks find it. It doesn't have to be a link to the data set. It is not going to be a repository, but it is going to link out. I feel like we have, as we saw yesterday with ornithology, there are so many places to find data, so many places to seek it out. And if you don't know all of that, if you're a new person coming into a field, how can you wrap your brain around that? And with new things popping up all the time with institutional repositories, so clearly I'm really excited about this. But I think it's a really great way to bring everything in one place. And it will also help, maybe potentially help cross some bridges across disciplines that wouldn't maybe originally cross. And then the Open Data Common Core Metadata Requirement, OMB M1313. So I'm excited about this one because, again, it's the government recognizing that we do have to have a common way to describe what the stuff that we're producing. We need to have a common language for describing the stuff that is out there. So a lot of the policies are talking about we're going to ask folks to describe their data according to this metadata schema. And it is out there, it is available for review. So maybe take a glance at that. And the role of the library, last but not least. Right now we're really awesome at providing guidance, data best practices. We can help guide folks about meeting those data and article requirements. Many researchers might not think ahead or know about depositing your data along with that article, but we can give them guidance on where to deposit that article. Metadata, we can at least start pointing them in the right direction about what metadata schemas are out there, or at least think about, if we could talk to folks about documenting their data, that would be so powerful. We can provide feedback on data management plans, and we can contextualize the bigger picture. Again, we can have folks thinking about archiving their data or what's going down the road, really leveraging our relationship and training with long-term access to work. So this is, I think, a really awesome benefit of librarianship. We've been doing it for thousands of years, right? Good to remind folks. We've been doing this for thousands of years. Don't forget, we kind of got this down. So our role moving forward, I think we can also help folks with things like data visualization, really help folks understand that data, consultations, implementing new tech. I'm really excited to see some of the services popping up. I think data literacy training will start being a really, really important skill for folks to pick up. Locating data, provenance of data, knowing what trusted resources are out there, knowing who's generating this data, as well as the ethical use of data. I mean, you can really make data say whatever you want it to say, but we do have an ethic. I mean, it's the same with publications. You can misquote things. I mean, you can misquote data. So I think this is going to be part of it, and we can really start thinking about how to help folks really understand data and the use of data in this very data-rich world. And again, leadership, we're super awesome at, organizing things, at thinking about making sure the stuff that folks generate is accessible. So I think we can really be leaders in this. We can be quiet leaders, and we can be really noisy leaders too. But I think we definitely have a role to play, and I'm excited to see where we go. And I think that's it. Yep, so that's my part.
I'm Cara Martin-Tetreault, Director of Sponsored Research here at Bowdoin, and I'm a one-person shop. So I'm curious. Just how many of you are from medical schools? Okay, large. How many of you are from predominantly undergraduate institutions? Okay. How many of you are graduate schools? Okay. How many of you don't know where you're from? I'm just kidding. All right, that's helpful. It has been, I know, it's the end of the day. So just to give some of you perspective, Bowdoin, we're 1,700 students and about 200 faculty, and I'm the sponsored research office. I have a half-time person, and I'm responsible for all the proposals going out and then the compliance when the grants come in. So thank you for having me, and I hope my talk will be helpful. And if I start using jargon or saying things that don't make sense, please stop me and ask questions along the way. So I was asked to give a talk basically I called it From the Top because I had just been to a show at Maine State Music Theater, so I was all like in musical theater mode. But basically, compliance starting from the top down. And, out of curiosity, how many of you have relationships with your grants office or sponsored research office or corporate foundation relations office? Okay, most of you, so that's good. You do. Well, for those of you who didn't raise your hand, please write down on your to-do list, schedule a coffee date with sponsored research officer. Well, that's good to know. Because one way that I have been on this job for 4 years, and what I have found is how we prioritize the musts and the shoulds with compliance is when I go to my senior officers and say, gosh, NSF is coming down with this, I'll be asked, well, is it being audited? Because that's how we determine when I'm a one-person shop whether responsible conduct of research training comes ahead of data management policy. Because responsible conduct of research, I have to track, I have to identify the students, we have to give them ERA Commons ID numbers, that's trackable, whereas data management policy, so far, I've been looking at the summary statements when the grants are turned down or when the grants are accepted and awarded, and there hasn't been a lot of feedback or criticism in response to our data management plans and what we submit right now. Although last week I did see something and it said, the very last line was, data management plan is good. So, except for that exception prior to that, we haven't had a lot of feedback, so therefore it hasn't risen to a must here at Bowdoin, but we are working on it. So that's really where I'm coming from with this talk. And it's so great to be asked to come talk to you, because when I had some free time and said, gosh, we need to do something about data management here at the college, and I know I'm not an expert. I'm a political science and Spanish major. I'm not a scientist. So I reached out to Sue, and she said, oh, it's so great. We're going to talk about this because we've been talking about this. So it was great to see that I don't need to recreate the wheel on my own as the compliance officer. I can partner with the people on campus that have the expertise. And so that's where we are. So as part of this process, from the institutional perspective, and for those of you who are wondering, well, why should the institution care? It's because grants are made to the institution. It breaks my heart when a faculty member gets really upset with me and says, I did the work, I'm doing the research, the grant was made to me. It's, well, yes, but the institution is actually responsible to administer the grants. The award was made to the institution. So these are kind of some of the bullet points I thought might be helpful to you as far as how, from the compliance perspective and from my office, things that I'm thinking about as far as how to bring the college into compliance here. And I'll be honest, we don't have anything in place at the time, but we're working on it. But these are the questions that we need to think about and answer. And this presentation will be on the LibGuide. So you don't have to write stuff down. So the biggest when we got started was, okay, so we're talking about data management, but let's step back a little bit. What's data? How do you define data? And what I found is that it really depends on who the funder is, and even sometimes which program you're applying to. And then if you can't find an agency's definition of data, then a lot of people go back to the OMB, Office of Management Budget definition. So that's been something that I've found to be quite interesting is, yes, we need to manage data, but how does your institution define data? How does this discipline define data? How does the agency define data? So I'm not going to go through all the definitions, but I just wanted to give you some examples. OMB, the National Institutes of Health Grants Policy Statement, Department of Defense, EPA. They're all different. I mean, EPA defines raw data, whereas the prior definitions just say data. So that is something that Sue and I and our team are looking at is, okay, so in our process, how are we going to define data? And what I have found among my peers, I have listservs as well, is that what a lot of institutions, Bowdoin size, are doing is what they're doing is they are deferring to the OMB's definition unless there is another agency definition. And that's what their policy says. But on the pre-award side, when faculty are probably going to be coming to you and saying, please help me with my data management plan, the first question you should ask them is, okay, who are you applying to? And let's find that definition of data. And let's find what you're required to keep. Because that will help when the grant is being submitted, but it will also enable the PI to start off running if the grant gets awarded with the proper definitions in place. So the takeaway is, as I said here, is I said institutions, meaning myself, PIs, meaning faculty, but also anyone else involved, need to be knowledgeable about the definition of the term research data, given all these different layers. It's one thing that's excited about what you said about they're working on having a one-stop shop to drop data, because when you're putting together a grant application, the directions are in 20 different places. So it can be really challenging. And also remember that your faculty are probably submitting this grant about 2 days before it's due. And this particular section is the section that they didn't think applied to them for some reason. So their sponsored research person is saying, you know, Professor so-and-so, what about your data management plan? And they're freaking out coming to you because they've got to get it to their sponsored research office and get it submitted. So this is, unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of time when we're putting these things together on the pre-award side. So the second piece from an institutional perspective that we're thinking about as we're putting together these processes and procedures is data retention. How much data are you required to have and keep? From the faculty lab perspective, but then as a grants officer, my office is the institutional repository for all grant-related documents. So that includes the reports, the annual reports that are submitted. It includes all the financial reports. So I have a partnership with our archive where they've set up a record retention policy. Originally, we were following the federal guidelines, which was 3 years, but then because my files have financial documents, the college policy came into place, so now it's every 7 years. So we have tried to think about how are we going to integrate all these different archive record retention policies when it comes to, you know, any data that may have been in the files. So that's just another place that, while you're putting these DMP plans together, think about these layers of policies that may be affecting what you put onto paper. And so, once again, I take it away. Just some, you know, things to be thinking about that your institutions, if they're not already thinking about, just need to have in mind, because we can't operate in a silo with these particular procedures. And then data access. I never really thought about this until I got my first phone call from someone who was made a FOIA request and wanted a copy of a proposal, a project description, and they also wanted copies of the report, the annual reports. And I called the dean and I said, who does this, you know? And she said, this sounds like something you would do. And I had to, you know, query my peers and ask for help, and I did get guidance, but it was brought to my attention, we don't really have a process in place. And what if Sue got the call? Or what if the faculty member got the call? We would have addressed it 3 totally different ways. And also, you know, how did I know what they were asking for was okay? So knowing what people have the right to have access to was important. So, you know, the Inspector General, U.S. Controller General retain the right of timely and unrestricted access, but it doesn't mean necessarily the documents. It goes back to the agency's definition of data. So NSF would ask for something different than NIH, who would ask something different from EPA. But it's something to keep in mind. What do people have the right to have access to? So what we've done is my office is now the FOIA office. So if anyone gets a phone call for information, they defer that call to me, and that's just been educating PIs and educating staff. And then I'm also just learning very quickly, what those requests, what people can have access to and what they can't. But that's something for you. If you aren't sure of how the process is at your institution, you may get that call. So how does that work at your institution? And I apologize, I'm running out of time, so I'm going really fast. And then, data sharing. When you're thinking about data sharing, Thea already alluded to this. It may not just be the data, but it could also be what other requirements. We had a computer science faculty member here. She had an NSF Career Award. She was actually the person that whose grant was FOIA'd. And when I called her, she said, actually, you can't. This is proprietary information. There's confidential data in here. You can't send this off yet. And she said, you must call my program officer. So I called the program officer at NSF, and he confirmed, yes, although this is a career grant, she's a young investigator, you can't send out any of this information until the grant is over. And being at a small liberal arts college, sometimes I think we diminish the relevance of the research done here. And so that was a eye-opener for me to think about. Are there IRB, are there confidentiality restrictions, proprietary information? That's just something else to keep in mind when you're helping faculty. And then I just thought it'd be helpful I've actually gone through all of these, except this one. But these are just something else for you to consider, when you're helping faculty with these data management plans, 24 hours before the grant's supposed to be submitted. What happens to the data that happens at your campus when the faculty member goes to another institution? How much are the institution is responsible for the research that happens while it's at your institution? What happens if just PI, before the grant even gets to your institution, but you have to transfer it before any work is being done? I've had this happen quite a few times. What if there's a strain and they're not sharing amongst themselves? And how does that work? Or can you build that into your DMP plan? And we've run into this quite a few times too, where faculty sign the contract and they forget, I'm federally funded. I have to, make sure everything's open access. So there's just some things to think about. I don't have the answers, unfortunately, but just something to think about. Anyway, so I hope that was helpful. And I'm going to be here for the rest of the morning to answer any questions that you have. So thank you for having me.